The question of the pupil. You have suggested that Ouspensky was teaching psychology and Gurdjieff was not. But surely, if we take qualities that we can have, such as, for example, self-remembering, then our work on ourselves is a process of developing in ourselves that quality or those qualities. Surely we are developing in ourselves these psychological qualities, of which self-remembering is one. The teacher replies, "You are here completely mistaken. You are in the Gurdjieff tradition and you are following the lead of Ouspensky. Let me try to lead you through this so that you begin perhaps to understand what Gurdjieff himself was actually teaching. Let's start with Ouspensky. Let's look at the book, The Fourth Way. Now I know that this is not a book written by Ouspensky, it is the record of his pupils, the record his pupils made of talks and lectures that he gave in those years in London between 1921 and 1941, when he was teaching the system. Very early in this book we come across a sentence, or rather two sentences. We come across two sentences placed together side by side that say the following: man is a machine, full stop. And in order to control the machine, we must do this, that and the other. So man is a machine is the first sentence. And in order to control the machine, we must do this, that and the other. I can't remember what Ouspensky says. You can look it up. The Fourth Way, P.D. Ouspensky. But just these two sentences are placed together. These tell us what Gurdjieff was teaching, and they tell us what Ouspensky was teaching. Man is a machine. It's not true. We can prove it's wrong, but Gurdjieff was teaching, let's look at man as if man is a machine. That is, we're looking at the structure, the energies of the machine, how it works. A machine is a complex device made by man in order to perform specific function or functions, and it always has an operator. So man is a machine. We're looking at, for example, your motor car. How does it work? What energies are required? We're not looking at the driver. So go back to these two sentences. Man is a machine. That's Gurdjieff's teaching. We're looking at the motor car. Ouspensky goes on to say, and in order to control the machine, we must do this, that and the other. To control the machine. This is the operator of the machine, the driver of the motor car. Completely different subject. So this is what I'm speaking about. And we can see this in the book In Search of the Miraculous, which is Ouspensky's book, where Ouspensky quotes very, very exactly. This book very exact. He write what I say. That's what Gurdjieff said about In Search of the Miraculous. And it's right. Ouspensky is very exact when he quotes Gurdjieff. But Ouspensky does not use these very exact quotes for his teaching. He uses assumptions based upon these quotes, and he uses extrapolations, theories that he has created, Ouspensky has created, based upon these very exact sayings. We're going to look at one in a minute. But here in the book, The Fourth Way, we have the two teachings side by side. Man is a machine, Gurdjieff. In order to control the machine, Ouspensky. So Gurdjieff is studying the machine, the structure and energies of the motor car. Ouspensky is studying psychology. He's studying the operator of the motor car, the driver of the motor car. A completely different subject. So until you understand this, then you are in the Gurdjieff tradition. You are working with Ouspensky on assumptions and extrapolations that he has made, Ouspensky has made, from the very exact statements that Gurdjieff makes, which are completely different, because Gurdjieff is studying the machine and Ouspensky is studying the operator of the machine. Gurdjieff is studying structures and energies, Ouspensky is studying psychology. Now, did you mention in your question self-remembering? Let's take this as an example. If we look in the book In Search of the Miraculous, we find a quote from Gurdjieff that is very exact. And if I try to remember it, I'm paraphrasing it so it might not be so exact, but Gurdjieff says to Ouspensky something like this. He says, "We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only when we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering." Okay? Do you see where I'm going? First of all, Gurdjieff says we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. How do we come to this conclusion? It's a try to exercise. Try to remember yourself to come to the conclusion that you can't do it. Full stop. Forget about it. Move on to the next step. Gurdjieff does not say go on and on and on trying to remember yourself. He does not say that self-remembering will develop in us in the same way as a muscle will develop. The more you use it, the stronger it will get. This is not true. And this is the very difficult thing for those in the Gurdjieff tradition to understand. Let me leap. I'll come back to this, but let me leap to the idea where we can see this quite clearly. This is part of my experience in terms of attention. In the Gurdjieff tradition, we can perhaps talk about developing our powers of attention. But this is nonsense. Gurdjieff says this is nonsense. If I, for example, in the morning I walk for 2 hours, do my shopping, come back, I've got the newspaper, I sit down with a cup of coffee and start to do the cryptic crossword. I can pay attention, and sometimes more than others. Better than others. Some mornings are better than others. Sometimes I get a few clues, sometimes half the crossword is done. But there comes a point where I can't do it anymore. Suddenly. It's a moment that you can notice. You can pay attention to it and realise it's happened. I can't do this anymore. And what's happened? The energies of attention have run out. So I can't pay attention anymore. I don't have the energies to pay attention. It's a clear line. It's a similar situation to when your car runs out of petrol. Your car is a machine. It can work and run and run and run, but at some point it runs out of petrol, it stops. It's no good thinking you can develop your car so that it will go further and further and further and work better and better and better. All you've got to do is put more petrol in. It's the energies of attention, not developing attention. So there is a difference between a muscle that you can work and it gets stronger and stronger. That's an analog situation. Whereas what Gurdjieff is talking about is the machine, and the energies of the machine. It's a digital situation. It either works or it doesn't. If it has the energies, it works, the car goes. If it doesn't have petrol, if it doesn't have the energies, it doesn't go. There's one or the other. You're not developing anything in yourself except the energies for these processes. So let's go back to the quote on self-remembering. I'm perhaps confusing you by speaking about too many different things, but let's go back to the quote. In Search of the Miraculous, very exactly recorded by Ouspensky. Gurdjieff says, we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But in order to remember ourselves, we must have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. He does not say, go on and on and on trying to remember yourself. You've already tried that and come to the conclusion that you can't do it. So we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves, but in order to remember ourselves, we must have the energies for self-remembering. Just as a car must have petrol to go. And if it doesn't have petrol, it doesn't go. It's a digital situation. You can either remember yourself because you have the energies for self-remembering, or you can't because you don't have the energies for self-remembering. There's no intermediate. It's not, self-remembering is not something you can develop in yourself. If you want to remember yourself, you must have the energies for self-remembering. Completely different subject. Where do these energies come from? How can we create more of these energies so that we can remember ourselves more? Not by efforts at self-remembering, not by trying to remember ourselves, in fact, by nothing to do with self-remembering, because we're talking about the energies for self-remembering. So we have a whole raft, again I use this word, we have a whole raft of qualities that in the Gurdjieff tradition we think we're developing in a manner similar to the way we would develop a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets. But it doesn't work like that. That's what Gurdjieff is teaching. And Ouspensky has misinterpreted it. Gurdjieff is teaching about structures and energies, about the machine. Ouspensky is talking about the operator of the machine. About psychology, something completely different. So if we go to this quote on self-remembering from Gurdjieff, very exact by Ouspensky, we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So this is Gurdjieff's teaching. Now, if I go back to the idea of attention, we can clearly see moments in ourselves when the energy of attention is exhausted. It just goes, gone. And from then on you can't pay attention anymore. It's not a matter of willpower, it's not a matter of effort on our part. You just can't pay attention anymore. So you have to I have to put down the newspaper, put down the crossword, put down the pen, stand up, walk about, make a cup of coffee, perhaps search for a biscuit, perhaps go for a walk, until those energies are restored and renewed, and I can pay attention again. It's not a question of effort on my part, it's a question of energies. The ability to remember yourself as a possibility for us depends upon the energies for self-remembering, not upon our efforts at self-remembering. That's an early part of the work, that's a try-to task to show that we can't do it. Then we move on, and this quote is from the situation where Gurdjieff has moved on. We come to the conclusion. How do we come to the conclusion? Because we've made efforts and realised that we can't remember ourselves. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So Gurdjieff's teaching is very, very precise. This is recorded by Ouspensky marvellously. Very precise, but Ouspensky doesn't use it. If we go back to the fourth way, Ouspensky's quite happy, in a sense. I know he didn't write this book, but it is what he said. Man is a machine. And in order to control the machine, we must do this, that and the other. Ouspensky, it seems, is quite happy to put these two statements together. And this shows the nature of the assumption that he's made. And this assumption follows through into the Gurdjieff tradition. The assumption is that we are talking about psychology, the operator of the machine, the control of the machine. And we can develop qualities allowing us to better control the machine. This is not Gurdjieff's teaching at all. Gurdjieff is teaching about the machine, the structure, and in particular, the energies of the machine. We don't have an analog situation. We don't have a situation analogous to the idea of a muscle, where the more you exercise it, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. It doesn't work like that. We have a digital situation. You either have self-remembering or you don't. You have it if you have the energies for self-remembering. Where they come from, we need to study. How to create them, we need to study this. But the energies for self-remembering have nothing to do with self-remembering. Just as the petrol in your motor car has nothing to do with the operator of the motor car, the driver of the motor car. It's quite difficult, I think, for people to see this. But once you do, you see immediately the error of the Gurdjieff tradition. Gurdjieff is teaching about the energies for self-remembering, which has nothing to do with self-remembering. So that's an answer to your question. But let me also move on to another misinterpretation that exists in the Gurdjieff tradition. And this is the confusion between the idea of self-remembering and the idea of consciousness of self. These are completely different things. So if I go back to what I've said about structures and energies, I've said that there are two structural situations that as ordinary men and women we have fallen into. Now the first of these concerns the fact that we have three centres and there is a flow of energy between these three centres. So at any one time only one of those centres is in a sense active. The other two centres are always working at that time, in terms of associations only. Their inner workings. So only one centre at any time, and this is changing all the time in a regular and predictable pattern, only one centre is in contact with the world. This means we can't remember ourselves in both senses of the term. We can't remember ourselves, we can't remember what happened in the past, because it happened in a different centre, and the centres are not connected in that way. And we can't be present, we can't remember ourselves in the present, we can't be present in our activities, because only one centre has the possibility of being present, the other two are working merely by associations. So that's the structural situation that is behind the try to task, try to remember yourself, to come to the conclusion you can't do it. We can't do it because we have three centres and this flow of energy between the three centres, so that at any one time only one centre is in contact with the world, the other two are working by associations only. However, this is a completely different situation to any idea of consciousness of self. Consciousness of self is a state of consciousness. Therefore, This is concerned with the second structural situation that we have fallen into. That is, we have two consciousnesses having absolutely nothing in common. This is what Gurdjieff writes from almost the very beginning of Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, and reiterates this in each major chapter of this book. We have two conscious minds having nothing in common, and in fact we are living in the wrong one. So we are living in a false conscious mind, hence with a false state of consciousness, which we can call waking sleep. But this is a state of consciousness, waking sleep. This is our ordinary state as ordinary men and women, because we are living in a false conscious mind. But there remains in us our true conscious mind, and being a true conscious mind, it has a true state of consciousness, a state of consciousness known as consciousness of self, completely different. So we have, again, it's a digital situation. We're either in one mind or the other. We either have consciousness of self or we don't. But the cause of this is completely different from the reason why we can't remember ourselves. We can't remember ourselves because of this three centres and the flow of energy between the three centres. We don't have a state consciousness of self in our ordinary lives. We have a state of waking sleep because we have two conscious minds having nothing in common. We are living in the wrong one. So these two things are often confused in the Gurdjieff tradition. Firstly, as I've said, they are taken as analogue situations where if you work on yourself, you can develop these qualities more and more in yourself. But this is false. Both of these things, self-remembering and consciousness of self, are digital situations. You either have them or you don't. And you have them for reasons. In the first case, in terms of self-remembering, as Gurdjieff says. But if we wish to remember ourselves, we must have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So we either have the energies, we have the petrol, or we don't. The car goes or it doesn't go. We have self-remembering or we don't. We can't develop it in any way. Now, although consciousness of self is completely different to self-remembering, it works in a similar way. It is a digital situation. We either have it or we don't. If our true conscious mind has the energies it requires to manifest in us, then we have consciousness of self, because consciousness of self is the state of consciousness of our true conscious mind. But generally speaking, as ordinary men and women, we don't have this state. So we're in a state of waking sleep. And we can't change one state of consciousness into another state of consciousness. How would we? This is absurd. And yet this is what I suggest to you is being claimed by the Gurdjieff tradition. And this is what your question is about. You have to, I think about this and understand that Gurdjieff was not teaching psychology. He's not teaching that we can develop ourselves or by developing these qualities in us. You can't develop these qualities in any way. They either exist or they don't. And they exist, as Gurdjieff says, because we have the energies for these qualities. If we have the energy for our true conscious mind to manifest, we have a state of consciousness appropriate to our true conscious mind, known as consciousness of self. If we have the energies for self-remembering, we can remember ourselves. But if we don't have those energies, we can't. Self-remembering is not something you can develop. We either have it or we don't. And we have it when we have the energies. Just as a motor car goes when it has petrol. And it doesn't go when you don't have petrol. So, I think I've answered your question there. You can, I'm sure, make something of that. But there is a crucial distinction here, and I think there are very few people, if any, who understand the distinction that I'm making here and trying to make here for you. Ouspensky was teaching psychology. He was teaching about the operator of the machine. Gurdjieff was not. Gurdjieff was teaching about the machine, the structure and energies of the machine. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves, but we can only remember ourselves if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. And I'll simply finish by saying the energies for self-remembering have absolutely nothing to do with self-remembering. In the same way as the petrol in your car has nothing to do with you as the operator of that motor car. You either have it or you don't. Enough said. I think I've answered your question.